Solitude, a curse for many, a refuge for a few. In a world that rewards distraction and superficiality, being alone is often seen as a failure, a sign of deficiency. From an early age, we are taught that our worth is measured by the number of relationships we maintain, by our ability to socialize, by the constant presence of others. But what happens when the crowd becomes deafening noise? When the company of others feels empty, like a screen concealing an internal abyss? Sometimes, I wonder, what if solitude is not a burden, but the price to pay for seeing reality with clarity? Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, did not just accept solitude, he embraced it. To him, the truly wise person, the one who understands the world beyond appearances, is condemned to solitude, not because they seek it, but because the depth of their vision inevitably isolates them from those who prefer the comfort of superficiality. True lucidity not only reveals the fleeting nature of existence, but also exposes the lack of meaning in many human interactions. Solitude, then, is not a choice but a consequence of seeing the world without filters, without comforting illusions. And this clarity, though painful, is also a refuge where the thinker finds their true self, far from the empty noise of the crowd. The masses are driven by impulses, by thoughtless desires, by immediacy. They do not think, they merely react, trapped in a cycle of constant distraction. Meanwhile, those who dare to question the status quo are not only set apart, but also experience a complex duality. They are both rejected by society and reject what they see as empty and superficial. Their way of perceiving the world makes them an uncomfortable presence, someone who disturbs the comfort of collective certainties. But at the same time, their own perception drives them to withdraw, to prefer isolation over engaging in shallow coexistence. It is not only external rejection that separates them, it is also their own voluntary renunciation of fitting into an environment that feels foreign. They do not merely feel rejected, they carry, deep within, the weight of an insurmountable distance. It is not just rejection, it is an existential divide, an abyss between two ways of experiencing the world. To be alone, according to Schopenhauer, is the destiny of those who see beyond, of those who cannot be content with the superficial. It is both a curse and a privilege, because those who separate from the crowd to embrace deep thought find a refuge where no one imposes expectations, where there is no need to conform or pretend. But that freedom comes at a price that sometimes hurts more than expected. The absence of human warmth, the impossibility of sharing the weight of existence with another. It is a sense of distance from a world that seems alien, an echo that resonates in the mind and chest like an endless void. Solitude feels like an abyss, but also like the only immutable truth. The paradox of solitude is cruel. I seek it because I cannot stand the world's superficiality, but at the same time, isolation pains me. It is the price of lucidity. To understand the true nature of existence is a curse disguised as a privilege. While most cling to fleeting pleasures and the illusion of happiness, the one who chooses solitude faces reality head-on, and reality, in its rawness, neither consoles nor encourages, it simply is. But is it possible to find a middle ground? Is it possible to accept solitude without falling into despair? Schopenhauer suggested that the answer lies in the inner life, in art, in philosophy, in the ability to turn solitude into a fortress rather than a sentence. But this is no easy task. It requires conscious effort, a renunciation of external validation, and a willingness to dive into one's inner world without fear of what might be found there. Schopenhauer knew what he was talking about because his own life was marked by solitude. From childhood, his relationship with his mother was distant and conflict-ridden, and he never found a true circle of friends or a stable partner. His pessimistic temperament and worldview distanced him from society, and though he sought intellectual recognition, he rarely received the admiration he believed he deserved. In his later years, he withdrew almost entirely, accompanied only by his dogs, whom he considered more loyal and honest than people. But this solitude was not only suffering, it was also his source of inspiration. His philosophy was based on the idea that the world is driven by an irrational will, a constant and insatiable desire that condemns human beings to dissatisfaction. The only way to be free, according to him, was through art, contemplation, and detachment from worldly desires. Thus, his isolation became a sort of existential laboratory where he explored the darkest corners of the human condition. In that seclusion, he not only reflected on the nature of suffering and dissatisfaction, but also forged his own resilience against the void. Every day was a confrontation with his own shadows, with the certainty that happiness was a fleeting illusion and that the only escape lay in renunciation and contemplation. His thoughts were not just theories, but the result of a constant, internal struggle, a radical immersion into the pain of existence that paradoxically allowed him to find in solitude his only ally. This was not a path chosen lightly, but an inescapable necessity for someone whose perception of the world was too raw, too unfiltered. Solitude, more than a refuge, became the only state in which he could endure existence without the distraction of false hopes. In that absolute silence, in the absence of superficial human connections, Schopenhauer found not only suffering, but also clarity. And in that clarity, he discovered that true freedom did not lie in fleeting pleasures or in the recognition of others, but in the renunciation of all that binds man to perpetual dissatisfaction. Schopenhauer was not an individualist in the modern sense, but a thinker who saw independence as the only way to avoid being swept away by society's endless cycle of desires and delusions. He did not promote selfishness or superficial self-sufficiency, but rather a philosophical and spiritual independence that could only be achieved through detachment. His vision was not that of modern individualism, rooted in self-gratification, but of a conscious withdrawal from collective inertia. To him, society was trapped in an endless game of unfulfilled desires, and the only way not to succumb was to step away from distraction and seek meaning in the inner world. Only in that distance could one truly observe the machinery of the world, stripped of illusions and pretensions. Although society may be hostile to those who think independently, the true refuge lies in the mind, in the realm of ideas, where freedom is absolute. It is in that intimate space that solitude can be transformed into a source of creativity, into a territory where reflection flourishes and existence takes on a meaning of its own, beyond what is imposed from the outside. If you have ever felt alone in a crowd, if you have felt that the world moves in a direction you do not wish to follow, perhaps Schopenhauer was right. Maybe solitude is not a curse, but an inevitable consequence of seeing things clearly. And so, the question is, are you willing to pay that price? If this idea has resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, and let's continue exploring the shadows and lights of existence together.